name is Lacy, and you are listening to More Than Child's Play with your host, my mommy, Lacy Morisi, and my Aunt Nicole Surgeon. They are authors, therapists, and most importantly, mommies. And man, can they talk. So sit back and relax and learn from their village. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to More Than Child's Play podcast. I'm Lacy Morisi, co-owner of Milestones and Miracles, and I'm here today with my bestie and co-owner, Nicole Surgeon. We are starting an education podcast series, and this is the first in that series, so we're glad you joined us. We thought it was a good time to tackle some of those difficult school topics for parents as they get ready to send their little ones back to school, so we're glad you joined us. Our first guest in this series is Sarah Poland. She's here with us, and she's a reading specialist who currently works as a reading teacher at Morgan Academy in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Sarah is passionate about instilling a love of reading in her students and believes that all children can be taught to read. With 15 years experience of teaching and private tutoring experience, Sarah has had the opportunity to teach children from many different backgrounds and in various settings. Sarah is trained in the Orton Gillingham approach to reading instruction, which we will expand upon later in the podcast. And Sarah holds a BS in child development, a MA in elementary education, and an MA in reading from West Virginia University. Go Mountaineers! Woohoo! All right, welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for joining us. So, obviously, reading is a very important skill that is taught early to our little ones. Sometimes too early, though. That's a whole different debate. But we want to just kind of start with the basics. How do we learn to read? It's a very complicated process, and it takes years sometimes for kids to really get a good hang on reading, and even some adults that still struggle with reading. So can you kind of back up for us and tell us how does it work within our brain and what has to happen for a child to become a successful reader?
Sure. From the beginning, our brains are hardwired for language, and that's where it all begins, is in hearing language, understanding language, and we start to put that together, kind of in a more complex process with attaching print symbols, our letters, to that to eventually learn words and then create meaning from those words, which is the ultimate goal.
One thing I learned kind of just recently in researching how we learn to read to help one of my own children is that our brain has a center for language, a designated area of the brain dedicated to language, learning to speak, learning to, use that language. It has a dedicated center for motor, but there's no dedicated center in our brain for reading, which I thought was really interesting. And when we learn to read, we kind of fire multiple parts of our brain, correct?
Correct. One of the things that I say often is that before we can attach, any meaning to those printed symbols, the first important part about reading is using our ears first, because it is so much connected with that language component. I forget what your question was.
What different parts of our brain do we use when we learn to read?
Mainly we start with that frontal part of the brain, and then we kind of work back from there. The beginning front part of the brain is where we do that listening for rhymes and can start to manipulate sounds, and then the next portion of the brain back, we go into starting to learn words and put things together, and then finally back to learning how to comprehend and attaching more deeper meaning, like vocabulary, with those words.
And I just think it's interesting to note that, it's not just one part of our brain that we use to learn to read, because it is such a complicated process. But we know of research that's out there that supports reading nursery rhymes to little ones, singing songs that have rhyming words, and of course just reading to little ones as often and as early as you possibly can as a parent. And why is that important?
again, back to that language component, and you're going to hear me mention this many times throughout our talk today, but the phonemic awareness component, those nursery rhymes, the songs, the jingles that we do with little ones is all helping to build up that base or that background within the brain to be able to hear those sounds, and which later then lends itself to recognizing those patterns in words.
Awesome. So, a lot of preschools nowadays will boast that they teach kids to read in preschool. And that certainly perks a parent's ear because, of course, they want their child to read and they just think the sooner the better. Is that true? Should we be teaching preschoolers to read?
In my opinion, no. I believe that exposure to letters, exposure to environmental print in a playful way is completely appropriate. But in terms of formal reading instruction, it's simply just not appropriate for a 3 or 4 year old. Some children are ready to start learning to read by age 3 or 4, but again, I don't believe that it should be done in a formal instructional way. If that child is ready to learn, it will happen kind of naturally for them, and that's certainly fine. Go with it as a parent, as a teacher, but to force that and for a preschool program to say that they're teaching 3 and 4 year olds to read, I really just feel is developmentally not appropriate.
Do we know, Sarah, is there a proven, or in your opinion, is there a specific consequence that comes if children are pushed to try to read before they're developmentally ready?
I can't speak to if there's any proof, but what I can say is just the stress and the anxiety that can result in trying to push something on a child that's developmentally not ready.
Makes sense.
If a child is showing interest in, say a 3-year-old is starting to notice letters, numbers, ask questions about those things, by all means we want to encourage that and point those things out. But again, to make it a formalized school type instruction is really just not appropriate. It should certainly be play-based interactions with letters, books, again, the nursery rhymes and the songs, all of those playful things to help build that language, the sound part of the reading component in their ears.
Mm-hmm. And we want them to enjoy it, right?
Absolutely. We certainly don't want to create stress in a 3 or 4 year old by pushing reading too early to where they are going to avoid it when the time comes for formal instruction to begin.
So the best thing, just to kind of clarify, the best thing we can do to encourage early reading in infants, toddlers, preschoolers is just to make reading books nurturing, pleasant experience. Even this comes up with the toddlers that we see through our work as early interventionists. Parents will be like, he won't sit while I read this book to him. Well, you don't have to read every word on the page. Go back to just experiencing the book together. That's the word I always use with parents. Just experience the book. So even leading up to pre-reading skills, just make it a pleasant, enjoyable experience with books, with letters, so that when it's time for them to get the direct instruction, they have good memories and have already kind of established good feelings about books and that process of learning to read. So
Exactly. You want to create that positive feeling, so that the child is associating a book with a friendly, warm, loving experience.
Absolutely. Okay. So there's many different ways out there, approaches, programs to teach reading. However, there has been a significant amount of research done and there was the most definitive research came out in 2000, I believe, that there was a national reading panel that was created to do exactly just that, research the best approaches and how the best way to teach reading. Sarah, can you just kind of summarize for us what that research found and how that research is being applied to the way that children are taught to read today?
Sure. So yes, the National Reading Panel came out with a report back in 2000 that still to this day is really the foundation of how we teach reading. And it identified 5 components that are necessary for a successful reading instruction. The first of those being phonemic awareness, which I told you you'd hear me talk a lot about today. A phonemic awareness, also called phonological awareness, is just the ability to be able to hear sounds, manipulate sounds. For example, identifying the first sound in a word, the last sound in a word. Also, a big part of phonemic awareness is rhyming. And again, this doesn't have anything to do with the printed word. This is all done, by ear, auditorily. The second component is phonics. So now we're taking those phonemic awareness concepts, but we're going to attach them to a symbol. We're going to attach them to the letters. So starting to learn your letter sounds, learning blends, and starting to put those together to actually start blending sounds to read words. So now we're working with printed material. The third component identified is fluency. And fluency is the ability, is your rate, your expression. Forget the third one. Oh, and the accuracy in which you read. So obviously fluency is very important when we start getting into actual word reading. You need to have all 3 of those components to be able to then lend yourself to the fourth component, which is comprehension, understanding what you read. The ultimate goal of the reading process, making sure that we understand what we are reading. The fifth component is vocabulary, and that just is what it sounds like. So understanding word meanings, understanding relationships between words, nuances within words, is another important part of the reading process.
Okay, so do you feel, in your experience of working in the public schools and now working in a private school setting, and just, I'm sure you have teacher friends all over the nation, do you feel that these 5 areas are being applied in the ways that children are taught to read?
I do think that they, from my experience, all of the, what the county, what's the word I'm looking for? The textbooks and the reading programs that the county will adopt they definitely cover all 5 of those components. I do think that sometimes emphasis gets more or less shifted, and maybe not equally put on those 5 components.
And they are equally as important, one to the other.
Yes, they are equally as important, but at different stages of the reading process. For example, in pre-reading, the phonemic awareness component is the biggest part. As you move through your stages of reading development, and for, an easier way to kind of say this, I guess, would just be as you move through the grades from kindergarten through first grade, second grade, etc., the emphasis is going to shift. Obviously, you're going to, as you go higher up, your focus is going to be more fluency, comprehension, vocabulary types of stuff. But I do see, as a concern is that the phonemic awareness component, I think is often, it's addressed in kindergarten and first grade, but I don't think it's taught quite as long as it should be. I see in my work with, in private tutoring, I see a lot of students who are older students who still do not have the phonemic awareness component, because it tends to simply kind of be dropped by about the middle of first grade.
And those kids are the kids that still struggle to sound out words. I mean, what does that look like in that child that maybe wasn't taught phonemic awareness quite long enough to grasp it?
Sure, they're certainly having trouble sounding out words because they tend to not even have the phonemic concept of being able to do it auditorily. For example, if I would say to you, Lacy, understanding the sounds in a word. So if I'd say to you, Lacy, tell me the sounds in cat, and you couldn't tell me k, a, t, that would be a concern. And I see kids who, are second, third, fourth grade who still can't do that auditorily and are being asked to read or decode much longer words, which obviously they just can't do.
Right, because they need to back up.
They need to back up and have that phonemic component.
Gotcha. Okay, so we know the phonemic awareness is really important, and sometimes we feel that it's, pushed to the back of the line, maybe before it should be, and that leaves some kids struggling. So, a lot of the children that you work with have been diagnosed with dyslexia or have suspected dyslexia or struggling readers. Can you define for us, because dyslexia is grossly misunderstood. It's kind of in years past been just a term that's maybe been thrown around too often, too loosely, almost like a garbage term that, people just misunderstand what exactly it is, myself included until recent years. So can you define for us what exactly is dyslexia and what makes a child that is diagnosed with dyslexia different from a child that is just labeled or identified as a struggling reader?
Sure. So one common, probably the most misunderstood conception about dyslexia is that it's a visual problem. It is not a visual problem. The issue with dyslexia occurs within the brain as you process information, most specifically language, as you've heard me talk about previously. So it's a learning difference that is neurological in origin. Another thing I'd like to point out about dyslexia is it's lifelong. Once you have dyslexia, you will always have dyslexia. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to learn to read. The effects of dyslexia tend to minimize with age, but once you do have dyslexia, it is always there. It is hereditary. So if you or someone in your family has struggled with learning to read and write, and your child is struggling, it's possible that dyslexia was a factor or is a factor. It occurs on a spectrum. So it's not the same for every child. Some children have very mild dyslexia, others more severe. So it does occur on a spectrum. It looks different to different people. So where one child their dyslexia may really impact their spelling and their ability to decode words. Another child's dyslexia may just have slower word retrieval. So they just are slower in their overall reading. So it looks different. Dyslexia can be found in conjunction with other learning challenges, but each of which I would like to point out need to have their own treatment methods. There's not one treatment method that is, say for a child with ADHD or that is on the spectrum that would encompass everything altogether. There are different treatments, different interventions that need to be used to address each of those specifically.
Mm-hmm. How common is dyslexia?
The last numbers that I have seen were 1 in 5.
Wow.
That's not diagnosed. That's
right.
That's actually happening.
Happening. 1 in 5 people, not students, but 1 in 5 people.
Do you know how many are actually diagnosed to compare that to?
I don't know, but I know.
What would you guess?
Oh my gosh, I would say probably 30%. Mm-hmm. It's pretty low. I mean,
That's really a big difference.
it's a huge difference. And it's a problem that fortunately a lot of educators and a lot of people in education are starting to recognize and starting to address, which is a wonderful thing that is happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's been more advocacy, more awareness that's been coming in the past few years. I mean, we still have a ways to go, but it's definitely a term that's out there and is starting to be better understood by the general public, which is certainly a positive for those kids that need this help. And also, I just want to mention dyslexia. I don't know the percentage, but it is more prevalent in boys than girls, correct?
That is correct. It does tend to be more prevalent in boys than girls.
Do we know why?
I do not know why.
Okay.
I've heard that in one of the books along the way I read, it said that girls are often able to hide it a little better than boys because girls are just
Better communicators.
They're better communicators.
Yeah.
They have higher oral language skills, and they're just more social beings, generally speaking. So they, can get through maybe a couple years longer before really being noticed in the classroom as struggling. Again, I don't know any research behind that, but I remember reading that in a book. And when I think about the kids I know that have a diagnosis, they're boys. I don't know yet any girl diagnosed with dyslexia. It's more boys. So I think it is that.
From my personal experience, again, with my private tutoring, the majority of the students that I work with that have been diagnosed with dyslexia are boys. I could agree with that. A little bit later, I will give some websites that if anyone's interested in kind of looking into that further, you may be able to find the answer to that.
Great. We can link all those resources at the end.
Sure.
So I have a child that's been diagnosed with dyslexia, and when we went through the process of getting him diagnosed early on in kindergarten, we did okay. Maybe we're a little behind, but nothing concerning. Teacher never really even brought it to my attention. First grade, we started to fall behind a little bit more. Second grade hit mid-year, and we were even further behind. So that's kind of when the red flags went up for us in the school. We were in contact with them. They were calling us in to meet, to try different strategies, to create, a response to intervention plan. So we were moving along with that. We chose to get a private evaluation done because I just felt like we couldn't wait any longer. We didn't want him to fall behind or get frustrated anymore. But when he was diagnosed, just to kind of expand on what's different between a child with dyslexia versus just a struggling reader, we did a full psychoeducational evaluation. They looked at every area of learning for him. They did an IQ test. And when that all came out, he showed to have, high average IQ, but he wasn't performing that way in the classroom when it came to the subjects of reading and writing and spelling. So when that gap is present,
yes,
that is when we know it's probably dyslexia, correct?
Yes, that's one way, when there's that discrepancy. And again, like you mentioned, the average to high average IQ. Another important thing to keep in mind with the difference between dyslexia and just a generalized reading disability or learning disability is processing speed. Mm-hmm. Students with dyslexia may have some slower retrieval, but overall they're pretty average in processing speed.
Mm-hmm. So through this journey of ours, I've spoke with a friend whose son also has dyslexia, and she said to me when it came to writing, one of the red flags that came up to them was her son loves sports, baseball being his favorite. You can sit down and talk to him for hours about baseball. He will tell you a million things, use this high level vocabulary. Then when he sat down in the classroom and his teacher said, "Tell me what you know about baseball," he wrote, "I like to play baseball." And that was it.
Yeah. So there tends to be, in terms of their listening comprehension and their verbal communication tends to be pretty high. But then again, written expression and actual word reading or reading level is low. So there's that discrepancy again between those. They're not matching up.
Right, which can be that red flag. Okay. So, all right. So now we know what dyslexia is, how it's diagnosed. And again, it can be diagnosed by a psychologist,
Yes.
correct?
An educational psychologist would be who you would want to go to, and that can be through your school system, or like you said, you can do that privately.
Okay. So now we know that much, but what do we do about it? That's the bigger question. How do we help these kids that we suspect or now know have this diagnosis?
Number one is that most students with dyslexia, again, remembering that they're all different, and a student with a very mild dyslexia may not need as much intervention as a student with a more severe level of dyslexia. But in doing a individualized tutoring is what all the research is showing is what makes a difference. There are tons of programs out there to choose from. I am trained in the Orton Gillingham method, which most tutoring programs are based off of the Orton Gillingham method. It's been around since the 1930s and 40s. But what you want to look for in an individualized tutoring program is certainly a tutor who is knowledgeable and who is educated. Do your research. And you also want to find a program that is multisensory, that's big for students with dyslexia. So a program that through the tutoring incorporates visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile components. And you also want to find a program that is systematic, that is sequential, and that is individualized to that student, to your student.
Is Orton Gillingham, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Orton Gillingham in general? I'm assuming it's a multisensory program. The little bit that I know about it, being a physical therapist and not working in my scope of practice or with my own children with any kids with dyslexia, is my daughter's kindergarten teacher had training in Orton Gillingham. And that was the first I'd ever heard of it. And I remember as a therapist going into her classroom to volunteer as a parent and thinking, oh my gosh, this makes sense. She had them tracing letters in sand. She had them laying on the floor and making the letter with their body. She had them standing and working on blends while sliding their hand down their arm. And I can still remember my daughter using one arm to pat the other and going, shh, sheep. And I could literally see the light bulbs going off in that classroom of 20 kids who some were kinesthetic learners, some were auditory learners, some were tactile learners, and I could see how she was presenting it in a variety of ways, and they were all getting it. And it was honestly a little magical. So we have some teachers that are listening in as well, and I'm just curious if they're not familiar with Orton Gillingham, because their reach is so far to help kids who don't even have dyslexia. If you can just talk a minute about Orton Gillingham and the benefits of learning more about that for educators.
Sure. Fortunately, I know a lot of schools in the United States are now leaning towards a lot of Orton Gillingham training, which it sounds like that's what you were able to witness in your child's classroom, which is wonderful. And like you mentioned, it's a lot of multisensory teaching. So using the body, like you said, to make shapes of the letters. With Orton Gillingham, we teach something called finger tapping, which is just connecting a tap of the finger to each sound in a word as you're sounding it out. And this starts early with, like for example, the example I used earlier with cat, you would finger tap cat, but it also can progress, as we go up in the levels and we're working with multisyllabic words, you still use that basic premise. Another part of the multisensory approach with Orton Gillingham is focused on syllables and teaching syllabication, which is very important to decoding words and also to spelling words. So with syllables, we pound them. So you're basically taking your fist and you are pounding it onto your open palm of your other hand. So whenever you want to spell, say, a larger word, for example, give me a word, ladies. Bicycle. So you would break it into syllables first. Bicycle. And pause and tap out each syllable. So by, I, sick, ick. And that is very helpful in a multisensory way for an older student to still remain multisensory without laying on the floor, making themselves into,
or having to have that sand tray,
exactly. It starts there, but Orton Gillingham,
it's developmentally appropriate.
Exactly, it's developmentally appropriate. So the multisensory approach is the big thing about. The big thing about Orton Gillingham. The other component is an Orton Gillingham tutoring session is very systematic. It follows the same routine, so to say, or lesson plan in each session. So it becomes very systematic, and so that the student knows what to expect, and it kind of trains their brain to know the sequence of what they're going to learn in a tutoring session, which is very helpful for a child with dyslexia. It just helps with organizing the brain, but it also lends itself to the stress and anxiety that I mentioned earlier. And certainly our students with dyslexia are experiencing stress and anxiety. That's something that we see a lot. So that systematic part of the lesson plan or the tutoring session is very helpful in that way. It also follows an Orton Gillingham tutoring program follows a specific sequence. That sequence is individualized to each child, which is, again, very important. Some children, we do at the beginning of an Orton Gillingham tutoring, we begin by doing an assessment or a diagnostic to see where they are and begin our instruction from there. And some students may have something missing kind of from the very beginning of the sequence, but then have a lot of skills there through the middle. But what you individualize the program to make it unique for that child. If they need to go back and work on rhyming, even as a fourth grader, that's what you're going to do, while continuing to work on other skills as well.
Awesome. So just recapping, Orton Gillingham is an approach that oftentimes is used with kids that have the diagnosis of dyslexia. However, it's an approach that can be used in the classroom to reach every type of learner. So I know some states, I think maybe Sarah mentioned it, have started using the approach as their main reading program or curriculum in the classroom and following that method and have had success with that. So it's not just for the children, again, that have a diagnosis or just struggling readers. It really is an excellent way to teach every kid to read with that multisensory component. And I just want to reflect for a second, again, back to my personal story. 20/20 vision, right? It's always looking back. You can always see the early signs before you knew them as the early signs. But when my little guy that has dyslexia was in preschool, we did an extra year of preschool, and he was not learning A says ah, B says buh. And his sister learned it. She was told it twice probably and picked it up. So I couldn't figure out, but I wasn't stressing because Nicole and I had formed our business. We were pushing play. We knew that not every kid learns to read early. So I wasn't really stressing about it, but I just looking back, noticed that. And how he finally learned his letter sounds, late preschool years, he watched those leapfrog videos. Again, I don't push a lot of screen time. However, in the leapfrog videos, the letters each do a dance, or I remember the tapping T. T says T, and then the little T, cartoon T, would tap across the screen, and he would imitate that movement with the T.
I love those videos.
Yeah, see? They're good. They're good ones.
Great.
The leapfrog,
Different it gave him a different avenue to learn the
Exactly.
sound.
It wasn't just hearing it or looking at it on the piece of paper in preschool. He had a movement to attach to each letter and the sound it made. And once he started clicking, then of course I started encouraging it. And in the middle of the day, what does the S do? The S says S, and he would do his little dance with it. But looking back, that was an early red flag indicator. Had I known, I could have been on it a little sooner, but I didn't, and it's fine. It all worked out. But he, from that day, he was a multisensory learner, especially for, those pre-reading skills. So just parents of littles that are listening, those early signs can be there. Just if you're, attuned to them, you might notice them.
Yeah, what should parents be looking for? Like, what are early signs that parents should be looking for?
Sure. So I'm just going to focus kind of on early literacy pre-reading skills, so preschool age, understanding that sounds make words. So back to that cat example that I used earlier, understanding that there are different unique phonemes or sounds that create a word. Rhyming, huge. I can't emphasize rhyming enough. First of all, being able to say, oh, hey, cat, hat, that rhymes. Mm-hmm. And then taking it to the next level of being able to generate a rhyme. So, if I would say to your little one, tell me a word that rhymes with Matt, and then being able to generate a word that rhymes with that. Identifying a beginning sound, a middle sound, or an ending sound in a spoken word. Again, these are all phonemic awareness skills, so we're not concerned with the print yet. Mm-hmm. Being able to recognize, blend, and separate individual sounds and words. Letter recognition, lowercase and capital letters. Like you mentioned, Lacy, learning to associate and the corresponding sounds with the letters, noticing whether that's coming easily for them, mm-hmm. or if that's something that's really a struggle. Just directionality, so understanding up, down, and left and right. And another thing, just the ease at which they learn to write their name can mm-hmm. be a bit of a flag. Most kids are eager and wanting to know how to write their name. And again, we're not looking for perfect penmanship here, but just the ability to be able to communicate their name.
What about letter reversals? Because I remember when I had a young one learning to write their name, and again, not being very educated on dyslexia at the time, mine would flip letters. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's all I knew really mm-hmm. about dyslexia is people with dyslexia reverse their letters. And I asked the teacher, do you think she has dyslexia? And she told me all about that being developmentally normal for a yes. period of time. So when is that typical? When should that stop? Can you just talk about that for a second?
Well, so it's like your child's teacher told you. Okay. Not something to be concerned about in general. And this is one of those great myths of dyslexia, just like the myth that it is a visual problem. It kind of goes hand in hand with that they're seeing the letters backwards, which is just not true. Okay. We know through extensive research that this is a language-based neurological condition. So the reversals, tend to, in a child without dyslexia, tend to work themselves out by about third grade, if not sooner. So if, third grade or so, if that's the only red flag, mm-hmm. I'm not concerned. Okay. If there are other things in conjunction with that, if they're reading slower, if their spelling is off mark, if they're having trouble retaining sight words, having trouble decoding words, some of those other red flags along with it, then that's a concern. Okay. But most likely you're going to see some of those other red flags long before third grade. After that, a student with dyslexia, they may continue to have reversals for many, many years. Mm-hmm. But we understand why that's happening. Hopefully we get that worked out, but that doesn't always happen. There's still some students, just that's something that they really struggle with.
And we see the reversals in their writing, but also in their reading.
Correct. It can present itself in both places. Seeing the letter P and when sounding out a word and pronouncing it with a B sound is not uncommon for a student with dyslexia. So it just, again, goes back to that needing that intervention, that one-on-one tutoring that is very explicit, that is very systematic and very repetitive to help retrain that pathway in the brain.
Have you heard of the chair analogy to help understand why reversals happen for dyslexics?
Yes, I have. You turn the chair one way,
it's still a chair.
It's still a chair.
You turn it upside down, it's still a chair.
Turn it to the side, it's still a chair. Turn it to the other side,
still a chair. But wait, lowercase b, if I turn it on its side, it suddenly becomes a D? Why? Why is that, right? So that's the kind of struggle these kids, because they're not attaching that sound to that specific shape of the letter B. Then the B gets flipped upside down, and it should still be a B.
Right. It's all the same to them. Again, we're incorporating those tactile and kinesthetic components are very helpful with overcoming those reversals. Because, again, you're connecting, all of those nerve endings in the fingers and all of those body movements to the brain. Mm-hmm. And it's just, again, strengthening that pathway.
And it's just like any learning. The more ways that we send a signal, the more sidewalks we take to get to the destination, the more likely we're going to get to the destination.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. One thing that we do in Orton Gillingham is, connecting the voice always with the movement that we're doing. So if we're tracing the B in the sand tray, they're not just tracing it with their finger without saying anything. They're looking at it visually. They're tracing it with their finger, where there are thousands of nerve endings in the tip of your finger that are connecting to the brain. And at the same time, they're saying B, 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 which, again, is just further strengthening that pathway.
Just like you always speak when you teach a baby to sign.
Exactly.
That's right. So you see those reversals with the B's and the D's, and then the P's and the Q's, too, are often, because the same thing. You flip a P around, then it looks like a lowercase q. So, but anyway, okay, so moving on from that. All right, so parents have some concerns that maybe their child is a little behind in reading, or maybe are noticing some of these red flags that we've been discussing today. What should they do? What's their next step? Stay calm, step 1.
Stay calm, step 1.
Listen to the podcast, step 2.
Step 2, educate yourself. Start doing some research, and I'll give you some websites and some books here in a little bit before we end that could be helpful to your listeners. If your child is school age and in school, certainly you need to be talking to the teacher, and from there talking to whoever is on the special ed team, the SAT team at your student's or at your child's school.
And don't be afraid to just read and research. I had a friend who encouraged me many times to check out a certain website that I'm sure Sarah will mention later. And when I finally did, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my child. So, don't be afraid of that, because anytime someone would say dyslexia to me the first couple years, I was like, no. And I was saying no before I even really understood what it was. So, just educating yourself there's no harm in that. It doesn't mean that your child definitely is or isn't, the label that someone mentioned. Just don't be afraid to learn more and to research more, because you're helping your kid in the end.
I'm just curious. We had a question from a listener who's a teacher, and she said she's been a teacher for 16 years, and she's certain that she's had dyslexic children in her classroom, but she's never had one that was diagnosed. And you mentioned it's so underdiagnosed. What can teachers be looking for? And in addition to that, just from observing, it seems that because there's that gap in education, do you find that schools, not picking on one specific school or county or even state, but just generally in America, are schools actively seeking out kids with dyslexic diagnoses, or does the burden, not blaming fault, but just the nature of where we're at education-wise, does that burden tend to fall on parents more to advocate to have that tested for?
I've seen it both ways, but I do think just the nature of schools, public and private, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to be looking for. There's a lot of kids are stressed. There are a lot of issues, for lack of a better word, a lot of things happening in today's society that unfortunately I do think it reflects back to the parents a lot in terms of them being advocates. Teachers have so much on their plates, and I don't say this in any disrespect or disregard to any teachers. Teachers have a lot on their plate. They're asked to do a lot.
It's the hardest job.
And so looking for dyslexia is one of the things that kind of slips through the cracks, unless it's a child who's very severe and probably has some other things going on as well. A child with mild dyslexia might fall through the cracks without a parent who is really pushing and advocating for testing through the school, or is able to take them to do private testing to have that diagnosis. Unfortunately, I don't think that our teacher training programs in college and universities have done a great job of training teachers to look for dyslexia. I know through most of my formal college and even the grad school, dyslexia wasn't talked about. It wasn't until I started working on my master's in reading that it started coming up and we started addressing it. So most teachers in a teacher program, teacher training program, even a master's teacher training program, dyslexia isn't much focused on. So they know they've got students in their class that are struggling, but they might not know exactly why.
Okay. So to those teachers, this child might look like what?
This child might look like a student who has really poor spelling, who can recognize a word one day and not the next. Same word.
That's interesting.
Or even from page to page.
Or even from page to page, exactly. Or even from top of the page to bottom of the page. Same with spelling. Spelling's very inconsistent. This might be a child whose fluency is just very slow. Their word reading is very slow. This may be a student who in third, fourth, fifth grade still has trouble tracking print or keeping their place in the book.
Interesting.
This also then, we start to lend ourselves to starting to talk about dysgraphia, which is the writing part of dyslexia. Some students struggle more with written expression and written communication, and it kind of lends itself to the OT component of this too, and where that can be helpful. That's something that I've seen as a real struggle is students with dysgraphia who are unable to get OT services in the school system because they don't have another more prevalent condition.
To qualify them
to qualify them for special education services. I've seen that time and time again. It's a very frustrating situation.
And back to some of those, what would that student look like in your classroom? In the earlier grades, it could be the student that cannot memorize those sight words.
Exactly.
And we were in that boat. I mean, we were stuck on the, primer, pre-primer sight word list for so long, and we flashcarded them. But what was missing was the multisensory. He needed to write them in sand. He needed to spell them with his body, for them to stick. He needed a lot more repetition. But that was when looking back, I can see that was a struggle for him from kindergarten on, and certainly now I know that was, one of the first red flags that flew up for us, but we just didn't know at the time that's what it was going to lead to.
Yeah, some other language skills that I'd like to point out that that can be red flags for dyslexia are just students who have trouble. And I say students because I'm a teacher. Sorry, guys. Children, students,
Students of life.
Yeah, so
students.
they have trouble retrieving words. So that they know the word for picture frame, but it's like you can see the wheels turning, and it's just so hard for them to retrieve that word. That's a common flag again for dyslexia. Language and speech development, which Lacy, I know you're very familiar with. Sometimes this is kind of back a little bit to where we were talking about the difference between a struggling reader and dyslexia. Sometimes the speech and language development can be a flag for a reading issue that then later on we find out, it was really just we needed to correct the speech problem. So I guess that would be kind of going back and answering that question from a while ago. That would be something that could differentiate between that would be a struggling reader versus dyslexia. Or again, a student who didn't have the proper education or wasn't exposed a lot to good phonemic awareness teaching, and so we think, they might have dyslexia, but then as we start working with them and teaching them those things, we realize that they were just a little behind because they didn't have the proper exposure or time with some of those skills.
Right.
I have a general question about tutoring. Just observing as Lacy's friend her process with her child and figuring this out and getting him tutoring and living the experience with her. And I would always joke with her that of all the kids between our two families, her child that has dyslexia, I always say he's the smartest because I've seen him in play skills, and he's complex and he's analytical and he's brilliant. And it was hard to figure out what was missing. But once he got the right intervention through private tutoring, to see the rate of flourishing and progression was just so incredible. But as I'm listening to you guys talk about that and how important private tutoring is and seeing it myself and him, I believe it. What happens to the kids in the general public school system that don't have Lacy as a mom? Is private tutoring that way? What happens to them? Do they get in pull-out sessions for reading? Do they get that? Is there an option for them if they don't have a parent who has spent the time figuring this out? Or even if a parent has spent the time but they don't have the resources to pay for private tutoring, what are their options?
That's a great question. So the school system does provide, there are pull-out sessions through Title I programs that are in place in a lot of schools where children who have been identified or flagged, not necessarily students that have gone all the way through the testing process either. A kindergartner or first grader who's been flagged as, with some of these warning signs will start getting some of these interventions to help
them catch up.
Unfortunately, and this is just the nature of the way it is, those don't tend to be one-on-one sessions. And I can't speak enough to how important that one-on-one is. Small groups are great, and it's absolutely better than nothing. And that is happening in schools all over the place, everywhere. But that one-on-one time really is, it makes such a difference. If you just think about the sheer amount of time and attention, there's one teacher giving attention to one child. So just the amount of what can be covered.
And detected.
Right.
Not just what the child can receive, but what the teacher can pick up on.
Exactly. I can pick up on every single little cue. I can also help correct immediately. So that bad habits aren't continued, or mistakes aren't continued. I can interject and help correct right away, rather than maybe that child has made that mistake 10 times before I get to it or before I catch it because I'm busy with some other students.
Are there any free resources for dyslexia tutoring?
Not that I am aware of.
Nonprofits or...
None that I'm aware of. I do know that, there are some great resources online. You can find some videos online. There's a website that has some really great videos. What is it here? The Shutdown Learner. And it's Dr. Richard Selznick, and he has videos, articles, and a podcast on there. All about dyslexia and being a dyslexia advocate, which may be able to point parents maybe in the direction of finding some free resources.
Okay.
Parents can also educate themselves to learn how to do some of the tutoring types of stuff on their own. I know Orton Gillingham does offer a parent course that you can take. The best resource I have found for Orton Gillingham is the Institute for Multisensory Education, and the website is just imse.com.
Okay, that's great.
And also the International Dyslexia Association has a wonderful website with lots of resources. You can subscribe to their association, and they send you publications with ongoing research and information on how to find tutors in your area, all that kind of stuff.
Another website that I visited early on that was very parent friendly as far as the way it described everything was understood.org. Have you heard of that one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's another good one. Parents that are maybe having some concerns can visit just to kind of get their feet wet and start learning a little bit about what dyslexia is and what it looks like and how it can be identified. So...
I'll throw in one website that I found that is Orton Gillingham based, and it's actually it's a student or child website. You can sign up for a subscription, and they do a screening process, and then it's online games and stuff like that that are all reading based games. I'm not a big proponent of, the online games and screen time, but for someone who's, really has no other alternatives, it is a nice resource, and it's called Nessy, Nessy, Nessy.org.
Okay, anything in closing, Sarah? Last words?
What do you want parents to know?
Every child can read. It just takes time. It takes persistence. Don't give up, and be an advocate for your child. Fight for them. And the International Dyslexia Association has their their quote or kind of their mantra is until every child can read. So I'll leave you with that
One
today.
more question.
Amen.
Sorry, one more question. We forgot to touch on just quickly guided reading or following along with
Yes.
read aloud text.
Almost every classroom does guided reading in conjunction with whatever reading curriculum or program they are following. And guided reading is actually part of the Orton Gillingham approach, correct?
Correct. As part of, our tutoring sessions, we're doing, things in isolation, dealing with phonics and all the phonetic things, phonemic awareness and phonetic things that I discussed. But an Orton Gillingham tutoring session is also any good tutoring session is going to include actual reading with connected text, which would be, guided reading. So
that's helpful.
The student reading, and you're right there helping to correct, helping to coach, so to speak, them along the way as they are reading. In classrooms, you typically see this done in a small group, where the teacher is circulating as the students are reading. In a tutoring session, obviously it's one-on-one. And again, the ability to be able to correct, coach, is just magnified.
And what is that resource where you can get books audio?
There's several. One is Learning Ally, and it's a yearly subscription, but you, with that subscription, have access to audiobooks. And for children that struggle to read, it's still very beneficial for them to listen to audiobooks because, again, when there's that gap between IQ and reading level, they aren't able always to read books at their cognitive level, but they still want to learn about that information or want to hear more about a topic. So, it's just as beneficial. They will learn the material in the same way, listening to it as if they were just reading it on their own. So that's an important thing for kids with dyslexia to have access to.
Absolutely. And it's perfectly acceptable. It's not taking a shortcut. It's not cheating. It is perfectly acceptable for a student to have access to those audiobooks and should be encouraged.
And other technology, right?
Absolutely.
There's been
speech to text, for the written communication, the ability to, there's so many, in our day of smartphones and iPads and all that, Alexa, there's so many options to help students that weren't available even 10 years ago.
I think that's important that you say it shouldn't be considered cheating.
No, not at all.
No.
It's enabling independent learning.
Right. It's helping. It's support.
It's
support for their learning style and their learning difference.
Lacey and I had a conversation about it once, and I said, you wouldn't deny a wheelchair to someone who needs help walking, or a walker. You wouldn't deny a hearing aid to someone who has trouble hearing. It's why would you deny a piece of technology to someone with dyslexia?
Yep, so true.
Because the specific example that came up in our family was, when he sits down to take a written test, he knows the information, but if he has to read it on his own off that piece of paper, he's not able to reflect and answer what he actually knows. So allowing my son to listen to the test on the computer and answer that way, he's able to better reflect his knowledge. So that's one way that technology can come into play in the school setting for kids with dyslexia. And of course, there's a whole process you have to go through. But just to give you a more specific example of how that can help a child in the school setting to better be able to let the teacher know what they do know versus struggling through reading the test and then not being able to reflect that on the paper.
Accurate way to test true knowledge.
Absolutely. Okay, Sarah, you're a hero to us. We love you.
Thank you. I love you guys.
We're so glad you joined us today. You are definitely an expert in your field, and we're so thankful that we could now share some of that knowledge that you have with our listeners, and we hope that everyone gains some golden nuggets today that they can take away with them to help, not only their own child, maybe someone else's child, to be the best that they can be. And I think Sarah's message at the end is worth repeating. Every child can learn to read. Okay? Keep that in mind. Keep pushing forward. And just a reminder that we are on the web, milestonesandmiracles.com. You can access this podcast along with all of our other ones from our website by hitting the tab at the top of the homepage, milestonesandmiracles.com. We are also up in the iTunes store. If you search for More Than Child's Play, we will come up and you can subscribe. And visit us on social media. We're on Facebook, Milestones and Miracles. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Keep us close by. We've got 2 more in this education series coming up very soon, and hopefully more even after that. Send us your questions. Send us your feedback. We love hearing from you. And thanks again for joining us.
And
Bye-bye.
don't forget to check out 1, 2, 3 Just Play With Me. It's the best baby gift you can give to start parents off on a good early start. It's a great therapy resource, and it gives a lot of detailed play-based ideas for the early literacy as well, since we're on that topic today. Can be found on our website and on Amazon and in some select developmental toy stores that we love and hold dear. So we hope that you'll have a great day and that this information from Sarah can help a child in your life. Thanks for joining us. Keep playing.